I think I did it.
Yep, I think we're good. All right, so I put together this presentation deck. Let me see what happens if I do this. All right. So can everyone see this? All right, I think that's kind of cool. I made that. It's like, when you make artwork of yourself, there's a sense of like you're being a little bit of fool yourself, but I think it's fun. I like to present myself this way. So, okay. So let us begin. I am titling this presentation, Rewilding Consciousness, How to Sever the Feedback Loop Between Your Mind and False Timelines. And so we're going to be covering both concept today, but then also practical steps, and not necessarily to say that the practical steps that I'm going to share are like the only way. I am presenting this to excellent. I love the wolf. I'm presenting this one for just inspiration, because we're ultimately, we need what we can create ourselves is always the most powerful. And then secondly, like if you want to duplicate it, there's always that as well. So let's go right in. So I'm going to begin with a full disclosure document. I think this is always important when people are presenting information. You need to know like where they're coming from, any sort of assumptions that are built into what they're going to present, just so that when you are receiving the information, you can still do that with your critical thinking faculties. And so let me read what I wrote. So the purpose of these techniques are to align consciousness primarily outside the timekeeping mechanism of the false reality matrix. Consciousness will be aligned to the baseline reality of the phases of the moon and the heavenly bodies. But life is a mystery, and there is much we do not know. And there are schools of thought that say, one, the moon is an artificial satellite, and it is being used to control humanity. This is, you're probably familiar with like the moon Saturn matrix. David Icke is the first person who I know who's really put out this idea. And then also the planets themselves in certain schools of thought. Gnosticism is, most top of mind for me. The planets are looked at as the controllers of the matrix. So I'm sharing that with you, and particularly with the preface is life is a mystery. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. And so there's no way to know for certain if the statements I said above are factual. And this is a personal decision. This is why I'm talking about this in full disclosure, because I'm going to talk a lot about the moon and the planets, and I want you to know there are other interpretations. So at the very least, recognize some other ideas. But the conclusion which I individually have reached is that the heavenly bodies and the moon are part of our baseline reality. And this was a choice. So it's like, you can't like prove it or not. You have to go on a belief. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with beliefs. I would say the only thing is that when you hold a belief and you don't recognize it as a belief and you're a true believer, regardless of whatever that belief is, you open yourself up to, you've got a big blind spot. And so I choose to subscribe and believe that and trust the fact that the heavenly bodies are part of our baseline reality. If more information comes to my attention, maybe I'll change my opinion in the future. But right now, I am at that decision, and I go by that on the very simple question is, at a fundamental level, you need to ask yourself, do you think the universe is a friendly environment, or do you think it is a dangerous environment? And, I tend to be, very optimistic by nature. So I see it as a very friendly environment. That being said, I don't worship any planets. I follow the planets. And so, you can define that, any way you want. We're all individuals here in a way, we're all connected, but we also have our individual experience. And so we get to make our choices. We're captains of our own ship. So with that being said, let us begin. So today's agenda, there are going to be 3 different sections of this presentation. The first part is going to be consciousness, reality, inner world, outer world, feedback loops, baseline reality, false reality. I'm going to go over a bunch of concepts. I'm going to go over these like mostly to lay the context of the real meat of the presentation. In fact, this presentation, this rewilding consciousness presentation, this is one of 3 which I plan on doing. There will be another one where I go really, really deep into this first bullet point, but all of them are about understanding consciousness. So then the second portion, we're going to go and we're going to talk about calendars, time, lunar cycles, lunar phases, and then I'm going to share my personal technique. Again, not to say that this is the way to do it, but to give inspiration and possibly a model in which you can follow and create your own. And then the last part is going to be, I'll be doing similar to as I'm going to share my own technique with the moon, I'm going to share my own technique with how I stay connected and why it's important, in my opinion, to be connected with the movements of the planets. So I'm going to share like what my starboard ceremony looks like, following the planetary rhythms of the skies, which we see in the heavens, talk about the ecliptic, tropical versus sidereal, and then objective passive astrology. We're going to talk a little bit about that. What I would like to do is in between each of these topics to give a couple minutes for any questions, because I'm going to be switching gears a lot, and a lot of times the questions you may forget as we get into the next portion of our presentation. But I'm only going to do a couple minutes, and if there are a lot of questions, we might have to do those at the end. So this is what I'm doing. Like I created these slides this week, and to be quite honest, I haven't looked at this slide deck since I've created it. I did not necessarily, normally I'd like to go over, like in my mind, run through the presentation a few times, but I haven't done that. I feel safe in this receptive audience. So I'm going to be reading the slides and then talking what comes up to mind. So I would appreciate a little bit of room as I find my way through this presentation. So that being said, let us begin. Rewilding consciousness is the purposeful disentanglement of what we have been conditioned to perceive reality as. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to do something. The way Zoom has it. Can you guys still see the screen?
Aye, aye.
Oh, all right. I want to show you the full screen, but unfortunately, the way that Zoom has the view of the gallery, I'm not able to turn that off, and that way I can't read all the text on my screen. So I'm gonna have to do it smaller. I hope that does not impact the experience, but we're gonna work with what we got. So rewilding consciousness is the purposeful disentanglement from what we have been conditioned to perceive reality as, to a more natural and free way of perceiving reality, in order to disconnect from false realities and discover new and natural ones. So there's a whole bunch there which we can impact or unpack. So basically the whole idea is this, is like the human experience is you're born into a system. Doesn't matter what the system is. Some systems are more harmonious than others, but regardless, the human experience is you're born into a culture, a system, and that becomes your reality. But all of them are false realities. There's no way around it. Like, unless you're a feral human and you have been raised by the wild, you're living in a false reality to a varying degree. And so it has always been the desire and the path of, we could call it the mystic or the seeker, to recognize that whatever system they have been born into is like, hey, wow, this is not necessarily the ultimate truth. And then they step out of that to then, if you will, almost reboot their connection with the reality. And when I say reality, I mean your life experience in a very material way, in order to then come back to within some degree within the system which they stepped out. That has always been the path of the mystic. It's always been something which has been not everyone is called to it, but it's always like a valuable or a respectable path. But considering what is happening in our world right now, what we're seeing in our world right now is extraordinary. This is not normal. You know, there have been times of like tremendous change and seemingly like, you know, creeping in of totalitarianism, but there have always been like these havens which people would want to go and escape to. You know, if you were around in Eastern Europe in the late 1930s, you'd be like, oh, I want to get out of Europe. I can see what's coming. But there's no place to go right now, because what we're experiencing is maybe not exactly worldwide, but definitely Western culture and a lot of Eastern culture wide. I mean, arguably they're the same. It's all globalism right now. But nonetheless, like, you know, because it is so universal, there is no place to really go. And because of that, you know, it implies where you do have to go. You have to go inside. Because yes, there are some minor changes you can do in your external world, but for the most part of it, that's not what this is about. This is much, much bigger. And so now, because of these circumstances, this path of the mystic, this purposeful wanting to step outside of the false reality, whatever that false reality would be that you've been born into, now is going to become a necessity. Because if you are not going to continue to participate in a system which is being forced down everyone's throat, you need to discover new ones. And the whole idea of rewilding is not necessarily going from one system and creating another one, but to get out of all of the systems in general and to go back to something which is baseline. And I'll define all of these terms in a moment, and allow the natural healing. You know, that's one of the things which we can see time and again in the material world, that when the material world is devoid of toxins, it naturally heals itself. We saw that in the atmosphere in Wuhan, when everyone was stuck inside and there were no cars. Like in a week, all of the smog disappeared. The earth just kind of fixes itself. The same thing happened in Chernobyl. Same thing happens like in your body when you sleep. The same thing happens when you give your digestive system a rest. It naturally goes back. And so we're going to be doing the same thing with consciousness. And you'll understand why in a moment. So let's keep on going. So consciousness, feedback loops, and false reality. So I'm going to go through a model right now into consciousness and reality. Not to say this is the only model, but to say this is the model I'm going to be making reference to, so that we know that we're all talking about the same thing. All right. So first thing we want to talk about is this concept of the inner world versus the outer world. Each of us has an inner world. You know, that's the experience you have as being an individual. This is like, you know, your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings and your dreams and all that sort of stuff that happens, that begins with inside yourself. And then you have the outer world. And the outer world is everything that is seemingly not originating from you. And there is a feedback loop between your inner world and the outer world. And the feedback loops are you know, it's just the way the material world works. I mean, the easiest one to understand is the whole thing with like oxygen and carbon dioxide with trees. Like, you know, that's a feedback loop. We're always connected. This is this interconnectivity, which we have in the most literal sense. And so this happens with consciousness as well. And so what you choose to place your awareness on in the outer world. So like there are infinite places in which you place your consciousness, where you decide to pay attention to. Like that is what you are creating your feedback loop with. And this feedback loop has a really strange sort of dynamic, because one can lead the other. And there are times like, it goes back and forth with who is leading, when the outer world dictates your inner world, but then your inner world can also dictate the outer world. It's, it's part of the mystery of life. So the inner world can also be defined as consciousness, or that, I'm using those words interchangeably. And so as it relates to the dynamic between your consciousness and the outer world, there are two things that really matter. What you pay your attention to. So there are infinite places you can pay your attention to. You're always paying it somewhere. And then how you define and label it. So you go and you look at something, or you think about something, or it captures your attention, and then it comes into your inner world. And that inner world, you have a definition system of what that is. This is why two different people can have the exact same experience. Two people can be in line to go on a roller coaster, the exact same roller coaster, and one person's inner world says roller coasters are awesome and exhilarating and so much friggin' fun, and another person's inner world is like, roller coasters suck, I think I'm gonna die, I can't believe I'm doing this. But it's the same friggin' experience. The thing that matters is how you define it. And so that is part of the loop. And a lot of our definitions, a lot of like how we define something, we don't even realize it's a definition. Like, this is where it comes back to beliefs. A lot of our beliefs come from experience. We came to this belief because we had an experience which would lead us to something, but those definitions can always change. And so this deals with the dynamic, or the constant change or potential for change which we have within our experience. We can change the outer world, we can change our inner world, we can change where we place our focus. All of these things impact and tie in with one another. So all right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the inner world. And so this is a model I like to go to. So there are three more or less realities, or even outer worlds. So the first one I define is baseline reality. And baseline reality is basically the natural world, but it's the natural world before labels. So I'm going to go and I'm going to label the natural world as I describe it, but just know that like the moment you start labeling it, it's no longer baseline reality. It starts to take a drift into false reality. And I'll explain that. It's no different than like the whole idea of the spoken Tao is not the true Tao. The moment you start talking about what the Tao is, like you're no longer in the Tao, but you need to speak about it in order to understand what you're trying to find. So baseline reality is the natural world and its systems and its cycles in what it naturally does. This includes your body. This includes like rocks and trees and like earth and like the sky and all this sort of stuff, animals. But as soon as we start labeling it, as soon as I start saying, well, that's a tree and that's a rock and this is my body, well, then we begin to move into the realm of false realities. And so false realities exist within the baseline reality. If anything, it's like, it begins more so within your inner world, within your consciousness, because you're the one who's defining it. But the false reality is the life which we live inside the baseline reality when we're not feral humans. As soon as we start coming up with language, like we are no longer feral, or we're less feral than we are. We'll go to the furthest extreme, which is civilization. And I define civilization as any highly structured, multi-tiered grouping of human beings. So we can have like some tiers in human beings where like there are elders and they're on a different tier than like, let's say, someone who's not an elder, but it's not quite like the upper class or the merchant class or the untouchables, or whatever system whatever system is used by a particular culture. I think all civilizations are immensely disconnected with the baseline reality. Cities are the greatest example of being out of harmony with baseline reality. You know, everything from like our Mesoamerican cultures to like the ancient Vedic cultures to the culture we live in now, ancient Rome. You know, they can vary in terms of how connected or disconnected they are with the rhythms of baseline reality, but they're all false realities. You know, anything which is created by human beings, that's a false reality. We're going to create them, but like the importance is understanding like, well, it's a false reality, and there's a real freedom that comes with that recognition, because that way you don't take the shit too seriously, and then you can also become a little bit more active in terms of how you structure your reality. So we've got this dance between like baseline reality, false realities, and then all, you know, both of these exist in what I call the greater reality. And the greater reality is just the recognition that, like, despite the fact that like we're on Earth and all this sort of stuff, whatever, we still don't know what the hell Earth is. We don't know where any of this is. We don't know how we got here. We don't know anything. Like, there's such a mystery, and by calling it the greater reality, it's just like recognizing, like, I don't know. I know there's a whole lot that I don't know. So it's not necessarily a denial of the mystery and like the really kind of like out there sort of things, but it's also a recognition that my primary experience of being a human being is in a physical body, which is, you know, I'm not saying there's not non-material parts of the human experience, but our base, like what we understand the most objectively, is the fact that we got hands and arms and torsos and all that sort of stuff. So these kind of represent our outer worlds. And so we are able, with our inner world, to go and move throughout, like with purpose, like, you know, what I'm connecting to. And so the idea of rewilding consciousness has a lot to do with recognizing our false reality, pulling our and realizing that the more we are connected with that false reality, the more we are strengthening that feedback loop, and the more that is influencing our inner world, and that's what our energies are going to, and all that sort of different stuff. And then the purposeful movement outside of that. You know, not to get too much on the topic, all we're seeing happening right now is a controlled demolition of one false reality to then transition humanity to a new false reality, but with, you know, with the same players. So like, this is the time where we want to go and disconnect from that. And, you know, I'll get deeper into that in a moment. So, okay, so here we go. A telltale mark of the false reality, that it is a false reality, is it is something that only exists because it is being fed. When a false reality is not fed, it will die. You know, if not everyone's participating in the banking system, it dies. If we are not voting, it dies. You know, if you don't go to if everyone boycotts a particular online personality, like their online personality goes away. These are all false realities. Objective reality, regardless if you believe in it or not, the sun's going to rise tomorrow. It has nothing to do with being fed. So that's another way to begin to think about false reality and what I'm calling baseline reality. So one of the things which is really interesting, or when thinking about this, is so much what I just explained, I don't think is necessarily a hard concept for people to wrap their minds around, and particularly a group of people that are going to be involved in an event like the one which we're doing right now. Like, you already recognize, like, yeah, Mike, I know this. But there are a lot of false realities which we take for granted. They're so ingrained within our understanding of life that we don't even think it's a thing. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. But so what I put on the slide, false realities appear to be objectively and universally true because they exist within a closed loop system that uses circle logic as proof of its validity. Tyrant says, I'm the king because this piece of paper says I'm a king. And then the subject goes, well, who wrote the paper? And he's like, I did, of course. That's what I mean by circle logic. So we can, so much of our experience, we've been born into culture, and that culture has been around for so long, and it goes so friggin' deep that we don't even realize some of the things are things, like, that can be questioned and deconstructed. So I'm just introducing that as an idea. Stepping out of a false reality is the only way to see its full spectrum of influence. Some false realities are more easier to see than others. The false reality that we're experiencing is built upon layer after layer. So, like this is one of the part of like the path of someone like beginning to see like all of the layers of the false reality. They first think about like celebrities in terms of how they're presented, and then they start like seeing these other stories of like, the Illuminati pawns, but that's like a more outer, like obvious sort of way of like, these are the false realities. And I'm not necessarily subscribing to that. I don't want to feed that. So a little bit more about the feeding. To move out of the false reality, stop feeding it. The further down the layered system of false reality you can stop feeding it, the greater the impact. So when I say that, I don't mean like, okay, well, by not feeding it, we're worried so much about the collapse of the false reality, but you want to focus about collapsing your own feedback loops within the false reality, because what that's going to do is it's going to be working within your inner world, outer world dynamic feedback loop. And this is what your experience in reality is. A foundation of, and this is, now we're getting to the meat of this. So let me go and see. I'm going to go through this, and then I'll break for a moment and open it to questions. A foundation of our false reality, one that seems innocuous, yet every part of the matrix is built upon it, and it is time, and it is how time is categorized. By moving away from the false time categorization, your inner and moving away from that being your inner world's timepiece and creating a feedback loop to baseline reality time, the foundation of consciousness and perception will change. So what do I mean by that? So I showed that like example of like, the celebrities. That's like really, really easy in terms of like, I'm going to move back. I'm going to move away from, I can see that that's false. Or this is, or I could see it is whatever it is. Here's one of the interesting things, like, because there's, as I said with consciousness before, there's like the outer world and the inner world. It's where you place your attention, and it's how you define it. When you watch like mainstream media, but your definition of it is different than thinking like, oh, I'm going to be entertained, or, oh, this is like real, or, oh, they're giving me objective truth. Well, then it changes as well. So like that does that its impact, the feedback loop's impact will change within consciousness as you begin to see through, all of the different layers of false reality. But nonetheless, as you're still participating within it. But I like to watch the news, but I recognize I'm feeding it, but I'm also looking at it from a different perspective. All right, but this is what I'm going at. I'm saying there is no such thing as 7:15 a.m. There is no such thing as Tuesday. There is no such thing as February. There is no objective truth about any of those. And so when I was saying that time is seemingly innocuous, the more we think about these things without a critical sort of reasoning, and just accept them as true, we are like continually to feed into this false reality matrix, both in its existence, but even more so within our inner world. And so we can go and say, okay, I know about the truth with celebrities. I know about the truth with you know, the UN. I see through Bill Gates and all that sort of stuff. But if you're still thinking like Tuesday is a thing, and you're still participating on the most basic level in which all of matrix reality is situated. Everything is about a schedule. Like, you know, this is when this is, and this is when that event is. This is when the weekend is, you know, all of this sort of stuff. Now, what I'm going to be suggesting, I'm going to tell you, is going to be a little bit difficult, and it may be confusing, but I want you to understand why this is important. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about how this interesting dance between false reality and or like inner world and outer world, and how false realities or how the outer world and inner world can play off of one another. And so I want to give this example, and I think this is really interesting to think about. So if you were to go and look at all of the data of like when people die, like, you know, they keep track of everything, so you can see when everyone dies. And you look at when, what day of the week, you know, let's say there's 1 million people die in a 100-year period, and you spread out those 1 million people out over the 7 days of the week. In theory, according to the law of big numbers, we should see an equal distribution of those 7 days of the week. Like, you know, everyone, it shouldn't matter what day of the week people are going to die, whatever, you know, it should be an even distribution. But that is not how it is set up. The truth of the matter is more people die on Saturday than any other day. And the reason is because like Saturday, like it spills over from Friday night. And like, you know, maybe people are out drinking, and like maybe there's a car crash since they've been cars, or like, you know, they get drunk and like, you know, they make poor decisions and decide to like get into a fight and kill someone. Whatever the reason is, statistically, Saturday has the most amount of deaths. And then that is followed by Monday. And so the thought behind that is we have been born into this world where, like, you know, you work 5 days a week, you go to school 5 days a week, and then you got, you know, then you get like a weekend, and then usually like Sunday afternoons, at least when I used to be more part of the system, like I could remember like when Sunday, like around 1 or 2 o'clock would hit, like that dread would start building, like, oh shit, I got to go back to work. I got to go into the office. And so maybe that's the reason why, like, that built-in dread, like a lot more people die on Mondays than the other 5 days of the week. But what I want to point out, and the reason I'm bringing this up, is there's no such thing as a weekend. There's no such thing as anything. Our false reality created such a system where that we know we go to work 5 days a week, and then we get 2 days off, and then we go back, and then, you know, there's that system. At the upper crust, at the level of reality where people like own the financial systems, you know, they own shares in the Federal Reserve, they own shares within the Bank of International Settlements, like that level of reality, those people don't have a weekend. They don't get that. Like, I guess they can understand the concept, but that's not their life. But it is for the majority of human beings. And so this idea, this false reality that there is such a thing as a weekend, gets so ingrained within one's inner world that it's believed to be true, that it then eventually shows itself in material reality, where there are statistical anomalies that say more people die on these days than other days. And it's only because of a fucking belief. And so when you begin to see, like, you know, I'm trying to like really paint a picture of like how this like seemingly like innocuous thing of like naming days like a certain day and having these counts. And there are a lot of good reasons. Like, oh, Monday is a great day to worship the moon. And like, you know, Saturday is really cool to get down with Saturn and all that sort of stuff. Or you could tie it into your chakras and all this other stuff. What we're going to get into is like all of these are systems. And so what we're going to do is we're stepping out of the systems, so at least we can go right back in. So let me go see what else I said in this slide. These are artificial concepts, though convenient, that create a foundational link between your inner world and a false reality. Convenience and refinement are often the selling points of false reality. The only reason all of the Western world accepted computers in the 1970s is because they were sold a bill of goods that it would make their life more convenient and give them more free time. As you can see, that did not happen. The entire false reality time management system is based upon calendars and understanding what day it is. Because you know what? When else will you know when to pay your mortgage? Here are two facts. So the word calendar, it comes from Roman times, so I assume it's got like a Latin base. It is the system for knowing when to pay your bills. When you're talking about your calendar, you're talking about when I'm paying my bills, because my time is money in the system, and they want your money. They want your time. Also, one interesting thing, we see this in language, a mortgage, you know, everyone wants to own their home, get a mortgage. Mort equals death, like a mortuary, like a mortician. Engage is a pledge. You know, when you do this, you are making, these are the levels in which we are connecting on these deeper, on these, in which this false reality is built. Like everything is layer after layer of like tomfoolery to get you sucked in. They got to work really, really hard in order to feed this friggin' system. All right. So before I get into this slide, because I'm going to start moving a little bit away from false reality and feedback loops and all that as a concept, I just want to give a moment to like ask, see if there's any questions or if anyone needs any clarification. All right. I'm going to shoot. So I don't know if thumbs up means like I got a question or if thumbs up. All right, I'm going to go right back to it. All right. I'm assuming that there aren't any. Screen share. Let me go back to this. All right. So now we're going to go back. I just talked. I said there's no such thing as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so now we're going to look a little bit about actual timekeeping mechanisms, because baseline reality does provide actual objective, observable, and universal time management devices. This is like the sun and the moon and the planets. So I got this little chart here. I've got baseline reality. So this is truth. And what I mean by that is it's observable and not like subjective. Like, you know, it's not only true within the system, it is true regardless of how you want to look at it. And then I'm going to compare it to like a false reality distortion. And false realities, they begin with an idea. It begins with an idea. This is why it's all consciousness, how you perceive, how you define what you're looking at. So, all right, so this is a day. Sunrise to sunrise. That's a friggin' day, whether you call it a day, whether you call it whatever. You could break it up and say like there's a time where we're visible and we can see, and there's a time where we can't see, but that is a division of a full cycle, you know, from sunrise to sunrise. Maybe do it sunset to sunset. It makes no difference if the sun rises at 7:15, 7:12, 7:18. The sun rises when the sun friggin' rises. So here's a false reality. This is calendar system. The new day begins on midnight. There's no friggin' thing as midnight. The entire concept of a new day is based upon something that doesn't exist. It's a concept. The more that becomes like, oh yeah, that's true. Now it's 12:01. It's the next day. Like, and you're not questioning it. And just questioning it's a big friggin' deal. Like just even being aware of this, it's like, you know, you are on the fundamental level. You're not even questioning what you're being told. You're like, yeah, this is the new day. All right, new moon to new moon. This is what we call a month. This is where month comes from. It's a mooth, M-O-O-N. You might say like, well, Mike, why isn't a full moon to full moon if it's cycle? Well, real quick with that, if you look at the natural world, look at the human being, when a woman first becomes pregnant, it's hidden. You don't know. She may know. She often does. But it's not visible until we could use this analogy a lot of different ways. We could say like the full moon is when the baby is born, you know, or maybe that's the end of like the gestation cycle. But the point I'm trying to make is when things begin in our material reality, they are hidden, which is what the new moon is. It's the dark moon. When you plant a seed, when there's before it starts to grow above the surface, it's hidden. So it makes sense, or at least that's the logic which I'm using for saying that this is the beginning of this lunar cycle. That's what a true month is. using Gregorian calendar system. Like, it starts on an arbitrary day we all agree upon. We're calling it January 1. And then there is a new month after either 28 or 31 days or 30 days. And there is absolutely no connection to the beginning of the new month cycle, as no connection to what is happening in the sky. When you are using your calendar, you're like, oh, look, it's October 1. What you're doing is you're understanding. You are understanding time and how you're going to schedule your life based upon a system that only exists within the system. It's convenient as can be, don't get me wrong, but it is false. And so when we are not questioning this falseness, we're just like, this is where we begin. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, I want to point that out. We're going to come back to the calendars a little bit in a moment, because different calendars have like different attributes, but I'm going to move right on. So a week, I said the 7-day week, we talk a lot about if you're into like esotericism, you're going to understand the importance of 7. It comes up many times. So we can look at the days of the week. You could tie it into some of those systems, and that's another conversation. But I want to go back and I'm going to say, well, there really is a natural breaking down of the lunar cycle, or of the move. Just like how the month is broken down into weeks, we can see the lunar cycle is broken down into something which is factual, something which is observable, and something which is universally true. One more thing I want to say is, notice how the week is completely disconnected from the month. Like, you can start a new month and it's not like on the beginning of the week, assuming the week begins on Sunday. They are disconnected. There is disconnected there. So going back to what is an actual observable time period, that is a phase of the moon. There are 4 phases which are identifiable. The first phase begins with the new moon. Then the next phase, it begins with what they call the first quarter, the quarter moon. I used to be really confused by this. Like the quarter moon, I used to think about it in terms of shape. I'd be like, why are they calling it a quarter moon? It's a half moon. Quarter has to do with the cycle. It is 1/4 of the cycle. The quarter moon is when you have the disk of the moon and it's completely cut in half. And as you can imagine, that corresponds with the equinox of the solar system, of the solar cycle. So we've got phase 1 goes from new moon to the first quarter. The next phase goes from the first quarter to the full moon. If you pay attention to the moon, you could tell when it's full and when it's not full. You can see, if you pay attention, like when it's exactly at a quarter moon and when it's not. The next phase goes from full moon to as it's beginning to reduce in light, and it's going to go to another quarter moon. And then the last phase goes into the next new moon. Those phases are the weeks. We can think about them as weeks. What is interesting, though, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, the moon does not fit a predictable cycle. And so when we see that the Gregorian calendar, that the days of the months have different numbers, there is an element of truth to that, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The solstice, like solstice to solstice or equinox to equinox, that's a solar cycle, that's a year. Our solar cycle, our Gregorian one, how we mark the year, that's a little bit off. You could see that it's roughly connected to the winter solstice, but again, it's an arbitrary day, which we call January 1. And then also, like other cycles, larger cycles are observable within the heavens. We know within the Gregorian cycle, like, a decade is 10 years, a century is 100 years. This is only based upon what's known as base 10 mathematics, where like we count on tens as opposed to like base 6 or base 12. There are other bases. And so again, these are concepts which we accept to be true. If you were to observe, if you got really into this sort of stuff, you could see other time cycles by following Venus or Jupiter or or Saturn or any of the other types of or observable planets in there. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that you go back to that, but at this point in the presentation, what I am hoping to share is the fact that that this is part of how false reality is created on these very, very like subtle levels, which we don't even realize, or concepts which we just take as being truths. And here's another hallmark of a truth with a capital T, or anything which is observable within baseline reality. Like, it's simple. Like, you don't need a lot of like conceptual ideas and advanced mathematics to explain it to you. It's observable. So, okay. So where's our next slide? Artificial calendars connect consciousness to a false reality, disconnected from the actual world which you experience. I just talked a little bit about that. I'll go through 3 different calendars right now, and I'll talk just a moment on those. Gregorian, that's the system we use right now. I mean, just the very fact it's named after a pope, that should be an indication of, who runs this, where is this coming from? What is the consciousness behind the Gregorian calendar? It is the same consciousness of the Vatican, of Rome, and like all of the institutions that came before it, which then, changed shape into that. So the Gregorian is illogical. This is very, this has been talked about a lot. Like, why is September, where sept means 7? Why is it the 9th month? Why is October the 10th month, yet it means 8? There's all of these things which are illogical. So when you have like a built-in contradiction within a system like this, so there's a part of your brain which is like, oh, wait, this is the 10th month, but you're telling me octo means 8, and this does not compute. This is literally cognitive dissonance, but it's not really that significant. It's not like, it's not going to affect your life. So what happens is there's the part of your brain which recognizes the illogic or recognizes the contradiction in those namings is like, okay, I'm just going to like split off. You're not going to put any attention to that. But this is part of like the splitting of consciousness. This is part of like the fracturing of the mind. This is the part of becoming ununified and unintegrated, because there's part of you which is like, hey, this doesn't make any sense, but I'm just going to be ignored. So like, that's part of the illogical nature. The Gregorian calendar, as I said before, it has no connection to the natural world cycles. Like, a new month has absolutely nothing to do with the phase of the moon. Maybe the first of the month falls on a new moon. That would be kind of cool, but chances are it doesn't. So you are connecting your consciousness into something which is disconnected from the natural world. I did mention this a little bit earlier. Within the Gregorian calendar, and particularly when you compare that to like a 13 moon calendar, like what's pointed out is the fact that some months are of 28 days or 29 or 30 or 31 days. And so that is seen as inconsistent. But the truth is, if you actually followed lunar cycles, you'll see like the lunar cycle, there's a little bit of play, like, and it's inconsistent. Like, sometimes it's 29 days, sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 28 days. And so that is actually the inconsistency of the size of the month or the month. But it is, so there's a truth to that, but it is disconnected with what's actually happening in the heavens. What we're interested in is integration with the environment in which we are actually living in. Because if we are integrated with something which is a false reality, then that becomes our actual reality. So that's the Gregorian calendar. Often what is compared to when you start to become aware of the problems and the fallacies of our calendar system, usually like the next step is you're familiar with the 13 moon calendar. There are a couple different versions of the 13 moon calendar. There's actually a movement, I want to say in the 1930s, of like moving to the 13 moon calendar. This was like gained a little bit of steam. And the reason why they wanted to do that was at a 13 moon calendar, you can be consistent with the number of days in the month, and you could coordinate the weeks to it. And so on a compartmentalization of like, if you got to use a calendar, this one makes more sense. That's totally true with the 13 moon calendar, because you'd have every month would be 28 days, and it would have 4 weeks of 7 days each, and the first of the month is always the first, the week begins on the same day, so it becomes very easy to know that the 14th of any month is always a Thursday, let's say. I don't know if that's how it would work out, but that there is a logic behind that, and that is seemingly advantageous to the Gregorian calendar. But then the 13 moon calendar really got into a more mystical element with, and I never know how to pronounce the guy's name, Jose Aguilera. I'm going to say Aguilera, like that's Christina Aguilera. I know it ain't her, but that's what I'm going to say, Jose Aguilera. So this guy came out and he's got a lot of fascinating stuff. And I've spent a lot of my time, like particularly like right around 2012, like doing a lot of research into his understanding of reality. So I'm highly influenced by him, and he had his 13 moon calendar, and his was a little bit of a change or a modification of the traditional Mayan calendar and the 260-day Tzolk'in. And there's a lot of like really interesting things about that, and there are a lot of benefits to that over the Gregorian calendar, and it ties in really nicely if you like to follow the symbology within the Mayan calendar system and the different days or different energy. And there's definitely something interesting to that. But it's still absolutely disconnected with what's happening in reality. Like what those 13 moons begin fit like that calendar system. Whether or not the new moon cycle is in alignment with what's happening in the heavens, like you're not connected to that. You are in another false reality. Now, this could be a false reality you like better than the Gregorian, like that's fine. But for the point of the information which I'm trying to present right now, I'm presenting of like moving out of all of the false realities to go back to something which is more baseline. So then like either you stay there, but at the very least, if you go back to another system, you have been reset, reboot, and you understand where you are, how you're navigating time. So then the last one calendar, which I want to talk about, is the Hebrew or the Jewish calendar. And what's cool about this one is it's tied to what's happening in the sky. But if you're going to go and incorporate this calendar, you're going to have to go, that comes with like, a whole nother bag of, with a whole bunch of other baggage, because now you're picking up all of like, everything that comes along with that. One, it'd probably be helpful if you understand Hebrew. Two, it also comes in built into the narrative of Judaism. That's not to say there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like, it's a narrative. It's part of the Abrahamic trilogy. It's like, I've got my thoughts of that. I was raised, my mother was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home. Like if you want to go by the school of thought that you are the religion of your mother, well, then I would be Jewish. But then again, you ask me, that's like the circle logic. It's like, it's like, I am the king. This paper says so. Well, according to who? Well, who wrote the paper? Well, I wrote the paper. It's like, well, that system is just not my law. I personally do not believe that I fall into anyone's religion, or my religion steps out of any of the limitations. So like, that's where I come from as it relates to the Judaism. But that being said, like there's a lot lot to learn from there. And there's a lot of wisdom. So again, like, you know, this is full disclosure. We are at a point right now that we don't want to follow any lineage as much as we become our own. And when I say lineage, I mean someone else's teaching. You become your own teaching. Understand why it is you're teaching. So, okay. All that being said, how far are we in? It's 6:08. I don't even know when I began. I'm just going to keep talking. Becoming familiar with the lunar cycle phases and implications. I'm going to show you my system. And so I'm showing this as inspiration. I'm showing this as, you know, you could replicate it, you could do whatever, but having studied this, having been interested in this for a very, very long time, this is where I am with it now. It has taken on many different faces. This is, maybe it'll change some more in the future, who knows? I will also say this, when you begin to deconstruct your calendar from everyone else's, it gets confusing, and you will be in a period of like, whoa, I don't even know what day it is. But you know, that would be, in my opinion, that's a detox symptom. Like, you know, when you go through detoxification, you're going to see the shit come to the surface. So, all right. So again, we're going to go a little bit more into this. Here's the lunar cycle. As we said before, new moon, this is your first week. As I said, from new moon to new moon can change in the number of weeks or the number of days, and that will be broken down into the phases. And the phases can change also, but you basically have like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. But that circle's a little bit misleading. I think a more accurate way of thinking about it, because a circle to me is a loop. And we don't like the loops. I guess, you know, I talked about the feedback loop. Maybe I should come up with a different word. But like we see a lot of like the Groundhog's Day movie loop, like that idea of like keep on repeating, keep on repeating. And so that is a big part of the false reality hypnotic matrix, is to keep having people keep on repeating, don't move on, just stay with them. So because of that, I think a more accurate way of looking at the moon is a ongoing like sine wave or cosine wave, whatever you want to call it. So at the this line right here, you can think of as like the equator or midline. This here is the new moon. Here is the first quarter, the full moon, the last quarter, and then the next new moon. And so this is the movement of how we see the lunar cycle from new moon to new moon. This is a lunation between 28 and 30 days. This here is our week. And so we can see it this way. But when we tie it into a circle, I want to point out that there are two different qualities. We can see it here maybe a little bit more clearly, but the two qualities are this. The two things that are happening is there is an increasing and decreasing of energy. I am defining energy by the amount of light which you see on the disk of the moon. And so we go from no light to like more and more light, more and more light, more and more light, to total light, to less and less light, less and less light, until there's no light. So there is an increase of energy and there is a decrease of energy. We can see that right here. This is the, I am going up, I am going down, I am doing work, I am going downhill. Effort, collapse. And so now let's go look at the other quality, the other way which we can look at this cycle. We have this line right here. This is our vertical line, and then there's a horizontal line. Everything above the horizontal line, the majority of the disk of the moon is lit. It is of light. So you are more than 50% of light. Right here, we are less than 50%. This is mostly light. This is mostly dark. So we can see this right here. This is that line. This is mostly dark. I'm working. I'm coming up here, full light. I come down here, collapsing. And we have like, this is below the surface. This is above the surface. All right. So the time of increasing light, as the moon grows in visibility from the new moon to the full moon, the earth is literally bathed in each passing day with more and more light. This is literally a growth phase categorized by work or effort. Aligning behavior that requires work and effort during these two phases literally aligns your actions to the workings and the cycles of the environment in which you experience life, aka living life on Earth under the moon. The full moon marks a peak time of energy and the start of the fall into the second half of the lunar cycle. This is effort. This is going downhill. This is going uphill. This is going downhill. All right. Decreasing light. As the moon reduces its light from the full phase to the new, the earth is literally bathed in the experience of losing energy. This is literally a collapse or decay phase characterized by doing less, working less, applying less and less effort. Align behavior by doing less strenuous activities, ultimately concluding with total rest. So this is the cycle. This is a natural cycle that is occurring, whether or not you are aware of it. We know that the moon has influence on tides. We know that the moon influences life on Earth. This is its cycle, okay? So I'm talking a little bit right now about like concepts, but like, you know, we want to at least be aware of them as we think about the energy of our environment. So now let's go into the lightness and the darkness. From first quarter to last quarter, so here's first quarter to last quarter, more than half the moon is visible. This is a time of outer visible activities. From the third quarter to the first quarter, so down here to the new moon to the first quarter, more than half of the moon is hidden. This is a time for inner or hidden activities. And it just makes perfect sense because we're bathed by the moon and we can see, oh, look, there's more out there, there's less out there. So when we take all of this in consideration, we could see there is a general natural energy flow with some degree of universal interpretation. And this is a little bit different than some of the other systems which talk about, like, you know, this is what Monday is about, and this is what Chakan is about. If you're into the Mayan, is that this is without labels. This is like just seeing with your own eyes what is going on in the heavens. All right. So here are the 4 phases. These are the 4 weeks. So phase 1, you know, you could look at this from an archetypical level. Like this is the winter. The winter begins at the lowest point, the shortest day, and it moves up to the equinox. What do we do here? This is mostly dark, but it is increasing of energy. So this is a time of hidden work, inner work, of planning, of strategy, of being by yourself. All of these things, like whatever this type of energy represents, that's what it is. You know, looking at Jungian archetypes, where this is the time of the magician. So now we go from the second phase or the second week. And so this is about increasing energy and it's mostly light. So this is like really like visible work. This is like this is action, working with the group. You know, you could say like the sort of thing which at least the presenters are doing right here. You know, this is like visible work. I'm out here, I'm in front of people. I'm like, doing that sort of stuff. The archetypes are spring. You know, this is the equinox to the summer solstice, and it's also the warrior. This is when we're working hard. So now this is the third phase or third week. This is when it's still mostly light, but it's also a decrease in energy. This might be more fun. This is kicking back. This is having a good time. It's still with the group. It's still with people. You're still out there. This is the summer. This is the time of the king. And then the last phase, the last week, has to do with decreasing energy again, but now we're mostly dark. So now we're definitely starting to slow down. We're starting to go within. We're starting to go inside. More and more, or less and less action, moving towards rest, solo time. This is the time of the fall. This is the time of the time of the fall. This is the time of the lover from the Jungian archetypical language set. So I said that this still haven't gotten into, let me show you this, then I'll get into like how this goes into my system. So you could see this same phase, the same trajectory, it lines up with the solar cycle. You know, the very bottom is the winter solstice. When it crosses the line, this is the equinox. This is half light, half dark. This is the longest day, the summer solstice. One of the things to recognize is as you become great, as you begin to pay attention to the natural order of time mechanisms, as the time period becomes longer, it requires more and more effort to follow it. Like a day is the shortest period in the time periods I'm talking about, and that's the most obvious. It's like, oh, look, the sun's coming up. How can I miss that? And then becomes the moon or the month. You know, that's second most obvious. You go and you look at the sun, or you look at the moon, excuse me, and it becomes more obvious of like the lunar cycle. Solar cycle is a little bit trickier. Because like, if you're not like, you don't got some system, if you're not measuring shadows, or you got some other way of being able to know when is the equinox, when is the day of equal light and equal darkness, or when is the solstice, when's the shortest day or the longest day, you know, it may be harder to follow that, but it can be done. And then like, so I wanted to just point that out, like that is built into the truth of our environment, but we could see it's the same friggin' model. So, all right, putting knowledge into practice, following nature's cycles while keeping a foot in the matrix. An example for inspiration and replication. All right, I'm gonna stop again. Any questions? All right, we'll keep going. The reason to move off of a false reality time is to reestablish a feedback loop with baseline reality in order to reset or detox your understanding of the unfolding of time. This takes effort and a bit of work. However, it can be fun, creative, and is a powerful way of disconnecting from the matrix. The key to following two timekeeping systems is knowing what the point of reference is. Whew, I forgot I wrote that. That's really important. You'll see why. All right. So this is Mike's date book. This is my date book. You can see the sticker on the outside. First page of my date book right here. This is my natal chart. This is the position. This is the position in which all the heavenly bodies were when I was born. If you pay attention, you can see there's both tropical and sidereal. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's where I begin. I also tell, like, you know, I mark in like when are the eclipses, when are like, you know, other things that are important. So that's how I begin. And then I have, and it's all handwritten, you know, this takes effort, but you know, this is how you learn it. And I have written down a calendar. And so this is my year at the glance is focused upon, or the point of reference is the new moon. In fact, I just finished my old date book. And so I just made this a month ago. So the timing of this is perfect. And so if we can see a little bit closely, like this is the time period of September 6th through October 5th. This is October 6th through November 3rd. And you can see it goes all the way through a 365-day period. I've got another 2 pages afterwards. And so now this is a close-up of one of those sections. So this is how you do it, or this is how I do it at least. Each one of these 4 lines is my week. Okay, and my week begins, I have the marker right here. This is new moon, first quarter, full moon, last quarter. And the first date right here is the first day of it. And so what I have done, I've always liked the idea of like, when Sunday comes, like laying out, like looking at what I have in front of the week and putting things down and just like kind of doing that, like those housekeeping things that are required if you're going to have a foot in reality. And so one of the things which I have learned or had to learn to do is I began treating each one of these days as I used to treat Sunday. This is when I do my planning. This is when I plan for the week. For this is my week. This is my week. This is my week. It was bumpy. It is a bumpy ride because I have 50 years of conditioning under my belt. But nonetheless, this is how it goes. I've highlighted right here. There are certain key days in everyone's month. And so I highlight my key days so I recognize it. And you could see what's happening right here is I have this system based around the lunar phase. And what comes secondary is the calendar system. What do I mean by that? This calendar begins when this month for me begins October 6th, not October 1st, but when the new moon is. And so I'm going to give you like a comparison. Most of you are probably, or many of you maybe, are familiar with what a lunar calendar looks like. This is a common display of a mainstream lunar calendar. It's a cool thing to follow because if you want to know about like the cycles of the moon and stuff like this is a really cool way to follow it. But it ain't this. Seemingly the same, but it's not the same. So this is the difference between the two. In this one right here, the point of reference is the moon. Your point of reference in all of consciousness is what are you comparing something to? This is your point of reference. We understand things based upon a comparison. And what you are comparing something to is the foundation of your reality, of whatever the thing is which you're talking about. So in this scenario, the point of reference is the Gregorian calendar. What do I mean by that? Oh, look, this is January 1. This is the phase of the moon. Look, it's I don't know, this is a waxing gibbous. I don't know what the phases are. Here I'm talking all about the moon. I don't even know what the things are called. But you see it's growing. So this is saying what matters is January 1. This is a matrix right here. You've got a X and Y coordinate system. This is a loom. And they are putting this moon in the loom of the calendar. The calendar is the foundation. The moon comes second. When you do this, this is seemingly like, what's the big deal, Mike? I have it set up the other way. And what I'm doing in my consciousness is I am moving out of the moon being a part of the calendar and the calendar fitting into the moon. These are the minor changes that if you are really going to get to the fundamental level of moving out of the matrix, this is where you begin to work. You bring down a Jenga tower. You bring down a Jenga tower either through controlled demolition, through exotic weaponry, or pushing out at the foundation. That's the only way you do it. And so we're bringing down this, or at least the own tower of false reality by going to the foundational level, which has to do with calendar systems. So that's more or less like that is the beginning of it. So the significance to these differences is in consciousness. The reference point is the foundation for perception. In this one, moon is primary, calendar is secondary. In this one, calendar is primary, moon is secondary. This is certainly better than just following a Gregorian in terms of getting in touch with like the unflowing of the natural world, but it's still, you're basing it in a reality which is false. This right here, here's another page from my date book. We see this here is a lunar cycle. And you can see I've got like the dates, this is the bottom, this is the new moon, this is the full moon. But I also did this big one. This is the solar cycle where you see the solar cycle cross the line. That's an equinox. This is the shortest day. This is the longest day. Why this is kind of cool is you begin to understand how these interplay, these different sort of cycles. And these little lines right here are significant within my personal chart. So I begin to recognize where my own personal story, where my own thread ties into the greater loom of like the dance between the moon and the sun. Then getting back to more practical purposes. So like, how do you plan your life according to that? Well, then I've got like a month at a glance, a lunar cycle at a glance. This is how I do kind of like long-term planning. I've spelled out for, each of the 12 lunations, which I've laid out in the year of the glance. This right here, it says like harvest moon. This is September 6th through October 5th. Right here are the calendar dates for me. I wrote down next to it the days of the week. You know, this, it's tricky, I'm telling you, but this is how, you know, you're able to really move out of the system. And then I write down like all the plans. Like, okay, someone sends me, can you do something on October 6th? I go and I'll look when October 6th is, and then I'll go and I'll write down. I can see what it is, but I still understand time in this loom of the lunar cycle. Each one of these lines here represents a different week. And then for the week itself, I set one of these things up every week. This is part of my practice. So this is like, you know, this says Monday the 26th. That is, let's go right here. I don't think that's that. So Monday the 26th is, no, it's the 28th. It was Tuesday the 28th. I couldn't read my own handwriting. That's the first day. That's what this week looks like. And so what I've done is I have a week laid out. This is how I like to manage my time. You know, I've got 4 different categories of things which I need to schedule. This is only for shit I need to schedule. I'm able to see it. I've got like times right here. This is I like to know when the moon rises. I wrote that down. And then this is just like to-do lists. But this is a way, what I'm demonstrating right here is a way in which you can begin to use consciousness or with consciousness, move outside of their time, of a false matrix timeline system. And for as long as you still need to go and use a timeline, work within the matrix calendar system, this is going to be a bridge to do this. I got one more slide here. Key points of using the system. Treat the first day of the phase as you would any Sunday for week planning purposes. Don't force events to phases. This is one of the things I learned. I tried to plan the things I wanted to do based upon the energy of the moon. Oh, this is a time to be visible and out there. And I realized that shit didn't work for me. That was too hard. So I started doing it. I just like line up, like whenever events line up, but I become aware of what the energy is. And then it kind of like dictates, like if I have a session with someone, I'm like, okay, this might be a little bit more internal. This might be a little bit more external or so forth. Focus more awareness on the moon phases and less on aligning your life to it, and allow a natural connection to unfold or to occur. Focus upon your energy and your feelings during the phases. Contemplate. You don't want to force anything. And then also anticipate a time of confusion, of not knowing what day it is. And so that is me sharing my lessons and thoughts, both in terms of calendar systems and then ways to create your own. The one last thing before I open up to any questions on that is, I know a lot of people love to use like Google Calendar or online calendars, and I know it's so friggin' convenient. All I'm going to say is the road to hell is paved with good intentions and convenience. Like that's what they want. That's exactly what they want for 1,001 reasons. So I'll get off my soapbox on that. Let me open for any questions. Any questions on that topic?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Who do we got first? Phil?
Yeah, I'll go first. That's fine.
And let me say this, Lindsay, will you do me a huge favor? Will you manage, like, if there's more than one question, can you manage that for me? Because I get all weird if I got to go and manage that and answer. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with what you've presented here. Just one question though, other than states of confusion and, forgetting what day of the week it is and getting that all kind of tangled up, is there any other struggles or growing pains you had when you first started following this system?
Yeah, I got overwhelmed. Now, I admittedly, my natural way of being is to like not have any schedule. I am so like, what works really well with my personality is like, I can meet whatever comes up. Like I know a lot of people are like really big. They need like a lot of like knowledge beforehand. Like if something's going to happen, like, oh, someone's going to come to the house, they can't just show up. But like for me, I love that. And so my natural way is incredibly spontaneous. Now, the flip side is, that really does not translate well into planning. Planning is a hard thing for me. So it's taken me a long time, and I still don't think, you could ask anyone who's ever tried to plan something with me. It's always a bumpy ride. I got worse. Like when I was trying to do like both, this is not understanding. This is natural for me. Like creating it as like a planning tool, not so much. So for me personally, I was even more confused by like any planning. And for like a 2-week period, I wouldn't take any appointments. I shut everything down because I became so friggin' overwhelmed. I don't know if that's going to happen to everyone, because I don't think everyone is like that. I think some people are better at planning than like naturally better, but that was my experience.
Yeah, and just real quick, how did you work your way out of it, or was it just sticking to the system you had in place?
My natural way is I can walk away from stuff really easily. Sometimes I come back, sometimes I don't, and I came back to it. I came back to it because I did not like, I knew I couldn't go back to the old way. And I just kind of got out of like any type of planning. And I kind of felt lost. Like I wasn't like taking on, like I wasn't scheduling. I had like 3 different podcasts like scheduled. I missed during this period. I missed them all. Like I started getting like really frustrated. I was like, fuck it all. I'm gonna do nothing. Like it's time for Mike to be a hermit. I've done my sharing. And then like after 2 weeks, I was like, oh man, I kind of miss it. And like this is kind of fun for me. I love the creating and the laying out and the making of it. And when I came back to it after taking a break from it, I kind of liked it. And then this showed up. Like Lindsay was like, hey, will you do this? Like everything started lining up. Like the whole purpose of all of this stuff, and what I'm going to talk about next, is about synchronizing. It's like synchronizing to a greater system so then life can carry you, because it's a whole lot easier to allow life to carry your stuff than you to carry it yourself. So that has been my experience. I had to walk away from it. I had a little bit of like, a temper tantrum, and then I came back as a little bit more mature than I was after like I got my teeth kicked in. But I don't know if that'll be everyone else's experience. If you try to do this, like, I'd be curious to hear what yours has been. Any other questions?
Hey, Michael. I've heard you talk about this stuff before, and it was so good to like really be here with you this time to see this full presentation, to really like absorb a lot more. I guess one of the questions I had about actually plotting out the phases as you do is, what resource do you use to plot out the future position and phases of the moon? How accurate is it? Because you talked about how sometimes the phase can vary by a day here and there. How does that play out? Do you ever run into it like coming off of a day after you've plotted out so far, and how do you deal with that?
Well, right now I've just used like a calendar which already has it predated. So I'm using someone else's system. So like you can go to like a moon calendar, like online, like it depends upon like how, like I have an idea that I want to be completely free of the internet, but that's just like, it's not true. It's right now something that something I want to move from. And each person, I think, needs to meet that their own way. So that being said, like I would love to be able to not have to use something else. But right now, I used either like a website on the internet if I have a question. I use other calendars which are pre-printed, which have the lunar cycles already in it. When I get the exact times, I go to a website. But the truth of the matter is, they put these out in other books. And I think that is probably, at least for me purposefully, that's a direction I would like to go. There's something called, and I'm going to butcher the name like I did Jose Aguilera. I think it's called an ephemeral. How do I, Chance, how I pronounce it? The book which tells you the position of all the planets and stuff? Ephemeral? You're muted.
Chance is muted. Is it
It's
ephemeral?
Ephemeral. So you could get something
go.
like the ephemerals, and they will give you the positions of planets and the moon for, I don't know what the time period would be, but for the foreseeable future. I think that particularly if you're interested in this sort of stuff, like I think it's probably a good thing to own. It's something I've said that I've wanted to own for a while, but I just haven't bought one. I think I'm a little intimidated. I was like, God, I got to figure out how to do this. Farmers' almanacs are probably fantastic for it too. That's a real easy one for the moon. But then it's, I think part of this is the experience, like of going through it and learning that yourself. Like, you know, I've got mistakes on mine. Like I like it to look pretty, but then I'm like, fuck, I mislabeled this and I get it off. But that's part of it. Like, you know, you're like fine tuning things in the mind. And I will tell you this, and I'm going to go on this in the next part of the presentation, is my understanding and my relationship with where the moon is. Like I always know where the sun is, but the moon's a little bit trickier. Like that's getting deeper. I'm beginning to get a better understanding geospatially where the moon's going to be at a given time. And I'm not certain, like that hasn't shown itself like in a payoff in like, you know, I get like golden chips in the mail, but I'm recognizing that's something I didn't do before and I'm kind of digging it. So that's where I am with it right now. But I think it's a journey. It's a journey. Any more questions?
Can I? So I had an observation, just really cool, because as far as like charting Bitcoin, it's kind of opposite. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. But like typically on a full moon, it's a dip, like it's a red bar. It gets dippish around the full moon. And then around a new moon, it's the top usually. So like energy wise, that's kind of backwards. I don't know.
Well, I mean, this is my thought. Like, when you see a pattern like what you're describing, and if your first take, like whatever the pattern may be, if your first take is like, wow, there's something wrong with that, that's seemingly backwards, and I've done that 1,000 times. I look at that ain't right. The first thing I ask myself is, well, maybe what I'm thinking right is backwards, because truth is truth. You know, the way it shows itself is true. And so when I said before, like in term that consciousness has to do with what we perceive and then how we define it. Like if you could develop the muscle to begin to realize like you've got all sorts of assumptions and to recognize when you bump up to it. And what that requires is the sort of egoic courage to say like, oh, maybe something I thought was true is actually not true. So how that shows itself when you see something like, hey, maybe that's backwards, it's because your assumption is it should be the other way around, but this is the way it is. So I would, if I were in your position, I'd be like, okay, what does the new moon represent? And why would it be, why would whatever cryptocurrency I'm following, why would it be peaking there? And figure out what that relationship is where it makes perfect sense. Like, for example, like, you know, maybe there is like, what the new moon represents is like, you know, the opposite, a cosine relationship. Cosine and sine they overlap one another, and there's a different cycle it's following, but it's the inversion of the moon. I'm not certain. I don't follow cryptocurrencies, but I would definitely, if it was something that was interesting to me, I would look into it. I've got a good friend who, like a brilliant sort of like mathematician, guy who kind of runs like a small hedge fund, I guess you would call it. And it's all built upon these crazy ass algorithms, which he has written himself, but it takes in consideration all of the, whatever cycle he can identify. And he does all of these different variations and derivatives of whatever his baseline cycles are. So, and he says that, like, you know, all of the technical guys that he interacts with, like, you know, they find a cycle that makes sense and they try to see like how they can predict it. So you're certainly in company when you make that observation. Anything else? All right, we're gonna go on the next part.
Well,
right.
I I just am gonna say that we thought that you were only gonna present for an hour, and our end time was actually almost an hour ago, and we've gone over already because we were a little bit late when you even started. And so I just want to honor people's time, including yours, just because that was not what was necessarily planned for. But if people here, which it sounds like people are very interested, might want to stick around, and if Michael, you want to keep going and everyone's into that, then I have no problem with that. But I just wanted to put it out there because we did say we'd end at 4, and it's now 4:43 Mountain Time at least. So I see some people nodding who really would like to, I think, keep going.
I'm going to keep going. Like what I would
Okay.
recommend, if you got to go, like, and I apologize for not respecting people's times, but I'm just,
Oh no,
I'm
yeah,
just
no,
gonna
I'm
keep
just,
talking.
but
We're,
I also, go ahead.
I was going to say, but we're going to record it. So like people can always watch this back if they miss it.
Yeah,
My
yeah, the
feelings won't be
recording will
hurt.
keep going.
I mean, they will
And very good point. And I also am wondering if we want to, in this little moment while we're breaking, Chance has found some winners for his giveaway. So Chance also is doing 3 15-minute sessions with people, and he has the winners he has selected. So Chance, I don't know if you want to announce those or if you want me to announce those. Or if Chance is not in the room at the moment.
No, I'm here. I'm
Oh,
just all
okay.
mixed up because I'm listening from my phone, but watching from my computer and was eating dinner, but I'm good now.
So there's 2 of you now.
Adapting. Yeah. So the winners, I have only email addresses for a couple of them, but the first one is Reagan. So we'll be in touch maybe through Telegram, or I'll email you directly. And then Angie.
And then the last one is Kim.
Kim. Okay. So the 3 of you, if you want to get in touch with me, you can either just get a cold read of whatever the energy is of your situation, a 3-card draw like I do on videos every morning, or ask a specific question to yourself, or let me know what it is. And I will be sending you a 15-ish minute video that has all of that recorded in it just for you privately.
Kim is very excited. I'm sure everyone else is too. If anyone wants to say anything, then feel free to unmute and say thank you to Chance. And there is going to be one more final giveaway before we go today after the presentation by Michael, which is so engrossing and awesome. So cool. All right. Well, then, Michael, we'll give it back to you.
All right. So how long have I been talking?
I actually don't know. I only know what time I told people we were going to do things.
Okay.
So
All right. So
yeah,
I want to know
I
how long this is for my own sort of like knowledge, but you know.
I want to say an hour and a half, but I'm not. Maybe
Holy
someone else.
crackers. I thought this was going to be a 90-minute presentation. All right.
But
Okay.
we're loving it, so you're good.
Okay. Where am I? Where is that presentation?
They said they didn't even know it was overtime, so it was only me who knew.
I
Of
have.
course, it would be me.
Oh, that's where it is. Okay, that's it. Okay, good. All right, so now we're moving into the next phase, and this is called understanding the God, this could be a 3-hour presentation alone, but I'm not going to do that just because I need to eat. Understanding the heavens and astrological revealing. So I talked a little bit about how I manage, like use like a date book. This is like more so like how I manage my ceremony life. And so this is a picture of the first day of every week of every phase. Me and my partner, Jenny, we sit down here. I sit right on this side. She sits right there, and we do the starboard ceremony. And so it's my personal practice to synchronize with the rhythms of the heavens. And so that's what this is. The whole purpose of doing this is to begin to create this feedback loop with the heavens, releasing expectation of what's happening, of like, you know, like what's my payoff, just saying like, this is what I want to connect with. And so I'm going to show you, this is how I go about it. This is probably going to be a little bit over the top, I suppose, but it's done for inspiration. Or if, you know, if this fits within your understanding, you got the tools, well, then, you know, I give it a whirl. So, okay, so this is what, so once at the first day of every phase, or at least that's what we shoot for, we build the we replicate what's happening on the heavens on this starboard. This starboard is a zodiac. This all makes sense in a little bit. You see this little book right here. Someone just gave me this book. This woman gives me this book. She owns a shop, and I go in there, and she's like, I want to give you this book. This thing is enormous. It's like 18 inches by 15 inches by 24 would be my guess. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with this? Well, I turn it into my starboard ceremony book, because inside it is where we track the starboard moon tracking ceremony. And we were doing this before, but just a regular notebook, but like something like this feels appropriate for it. And as you can see, here's a close-up. What it is I'll have the phase, because this is the first thing listed, because that is the foundation of what I'm doing. It's the phase. This is the calendar date when it's done. And then this is moon or sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, all the way through to the North Node. And then I do pick 2 cards. And so this is what we do. And we just move the planets accordingly. And we do it on the moon phase. Now, we use the Citral Positioning, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but like, use whatever you wish to use if you're going to use it. So here's the starboard. And this is a replica of the zodiac. And what we have here is each one of these stones, you can see the stones are here, they represent a planet. I know what planet it is because I've been using this for years, so I know what it is. And we keep the board up. I used to take it down a lot. When I say down or up, so if you look at this outer wheel, I would take the planets down. So for example, this is this one right here is Jupiter. I would put Jupiter when it's not in use right here in the house it's associated with. And so if I was going to build someone's chart, I'd put them up, I would put it down. And then like if I was going to go and do something in real time, I would go and create it. But what I stopped building people's charts on the starboard, and we just keep it up all the time. And so what happens is we begin to see at each phase, we go and we move the stone as much as the planet has moved in the heavens. If you had one of those, I already forgot how to pronounce it, the ephemeral, like you could go and write your dates down from that. I use current planetary positions.com. That's how I make the sausage. But so we see that as we have like the real-time planets are in place, and then you'll see these discs, these circles, and they have planetary symbols. What those are my actual natal chart. And so one of the cool things of happening is as these stones move, these discs never do, because your natal chart doesn't change unless you change from tropical to sidereal. And you get to see like how the planets go over and affect the different parts of the heavens in real time based upon your natal chart. That's a really cool sort of thing, or at least I found that to be really cool. So let's go look right here. This right here, if you were to go and pull a chart, like whether it's your natal chart or whether to go look at what's happening in the heavens, this is what you're going to get. This here is the beginning. This is the ascendant. If you don't know anything about astrology, don't even worry about it. And then each one of these symbols out here represents the placement of a planet. And all of that has been replicated right here. This is where the ascendant is. That's the ascendant. That's the 12th house. It's the first house. That's 12. That's 1, just to give you like a layout. So now let's go look. So this is just so you could see what it looks like. So this picture was taken from September 14th, and this was at the first quarter. And so this is the stone of the sun. This is Mars. This is Mercury. This is Venus. This is the moon. And in reality, these are the only ones which you're going to see move every phase. The other planets might move, depending upon the planet, maybe 1 degree during a lunar cycle, like Jupiter or Saturn or something like that. They move much slower. So you begin to like literally get a feel for like the speed and the rhythm by doing this. And so I want to show you what 1 week looks like in movement. So this is up like this all week long. And then like the next week, you know, the next time we did this, which was the 20th on the full moon, well, the sun changed 6 degrees. So this is the sun. So if a circle is 360 degrees, like each one of these pi pieces is 30, 12 times 30 is 360. And about 6 degrees, it's just an eyeball. So, you know, you move it from here. And Mars moved 4 degrees. And you're beginning to see the speed and the rhythm of this. And then we see Mercury change 5 degrees in this phase. And they change different amounts of degrees every phase. Venus took a huge jump. Typically, Mercury moves the most in a phase, but Venus in this time took a huge jump. Mercury moves the most of the planets. And then we have the moon, which moved 89 degrees or about 90 degrees. And so you could kind of go and look at the previous slide, like look at the sun. The sun is in the green section, but in the previous month or the previous phase, it was in the orange section. You can see it just like inches ever so slightly. The moon was right here, and now it's going to move all the way to right there. And so this act of being able to in a ceremony, and all ceremony means is you're getting into a certain state of consciousness in terms of like, hey, this is special. I'm giving reverence to this. This means something to me. This is what you're doing. You're looking at this and you're paying attention to it. We do pick cards. And so the cards are cool because you then go and you see the card associated with the new moon or the full moon, and you begin to see patterns, and that becomes really cool. But nonetheless, what's happening is the idea, this is 100% friggin' abstract. Like only 1% of the population could even look at this and know what this means. And I'm going to say only 1% of the people who could interpret this even would be able to say what this actually represents. But when you begin to go and translate this to this, it becomes more and more real. What I mean by that, more and more concrete. And so this is what the movement, what I'm going to show you right now what my journey has been. It's what my journey has been from the abstract to the concrete. Abstract, less abstract, it's still just an abstract concept, to now something concrete. All right. So if you recall, this was September 20th, you know, last week or whatever that was, last phase. Words are screwing me up. This is a picture taken outside of my house. I am facing south. To the left is the eastern horizon. To the west will eventually be the western horizon. And this was taken at 9 p.m. So now what are we looking at? This is the full moon. This little white dot right here, this is Jupiter. And this here is Saturn. So now let's go look at our chart. So this is most people who can read a chart, they only think about it as an abstract. They're like, oh, I know what this means. I can look right here. And this means moon is at, and this is Citral, or no, this is tropical. Moon is at 25 degrees Pisces, without really thought of what that is. Oh, look right here. This is what Jupiter I find at 23 degrees Aquarius, that, and they're able to read it. And, you know, the ascendant, the rising sign is Taurus. So that is a truth. There's a truth to that. But what is also being indicated in this chart is a literal snapshot of what is visible at the heavens, at the time and place of what the chart represents. So for this is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's where I'm located. This is 9 p.m. and it's the 20th. This is exactly at the time this was taken. So the what's known as the Ascendant, or the which is the beginning of the zodiac, it's where this 12 goes to 1. It is this line right here. Actually, here I got it somewhere else. Where is it? Right here, 12 to 1. The ascendant's a literal thing. What the ascendant is the eastern horizon. Doesn't matter where you are. If you are facing east, or assuming you're north of the equator, the eastern horizon is the ascendant. That is the ascendant. The descendant is the western horizon. And on a chart, everything above this line is visible in the sky, either with your eyes or by theory. And then everything which is below the line is not visible. So what I did right here is I took this, I drew this line right here. So what we're saying is all of this should be visible and the stuff shouldn't be visible. And in fact, it's going to tell you kind of like where in the sky it's going to be. It should line up. So I took this chart, I cut it off right here, and then I took away everything that is not visible by your own eye. So this would imply that Uranus is rising right on the eastern horizon. This would say Neptune is right here, Chiron is right here, and Pluto is right here. But you can't see any of those without a telescope. But what this is saying is like the moon would be like right here. And then this is where Jupiter would be, and this is where Saturn would be. And all three of those are visible with your own eyes. So let's go take a look, right? You know, this is, let me go down here. Here we go. Moon, moon, Jupiter, Jupiter, Saturn, Saturn. When you begin to follow the planets and you begin to take it from just a straight up abstract, because this is cooler. If you could follow it this way or a chart, that's awesome. And then if you could play with it on a playboard, you know, that becomes even more awesome. But then when you could translate this into what you're seeing within your own eyes, what's happening is this becomes something real. And the reason why we want this to become real is we want to rewild our consciousness. You know, we want to begin to have our perceptions and our interpretations outside of the matrix system. So, so we got that. I'm going to go into a little bit more about some astrology basics right now, because I find this very important and interesting as well, and it ties into all of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ecliptic, tropical, and sidereal zodiac. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I think these are very, very important topics, particularly for anyone who's interested in like understanding the environment which we're living in, but they're kind of confusing. And I want it not to be an abstract idea, but I want it to be literal. So, okay. So let's start this way. I'm going to talk about the ecliptic. And when I say the ecliptic, it is this particular band of stars. So if this is you standing on the earth, and if you can imagine, there's this band from our perspective looking up that goes round and around and around this very certain section, not up here, not over here, but this section, this is known as the ecliptic. And it's called the ecliptic because, or the reason why the ecliptic is important is because for whatever reason, this is what the line, the racetrack, which all the planets go around. All right. So now when we go back to this is where the moon is, this is where Jupiter is, this is where Saturn is. This is called the ecliptic. Okay. And the ecliptic is so friggin' human scale. And what I mean by that is when you look at the ecliptic is, it's at a 23.5 degree angle from the plane of the earth. And so translated into regular speak, that means when you look up at it to see the ecliptic, assuming you're in the north of the equator and you're looking south, the ecliptic is just like barely lifting up your chin, barely looking up your chin, and you're going to be looking right at the ecliptic. It's like where you're naturally going to be looking. And when I say like comparison to directly over your head, if the ecliptic was directly over your head, you'd have to crane your neck or lie on your back. That's not human scale, or at least I don't think that's human scale. Like you're meant to look at the ecliptic for whatever reason. So we become familiar with the ecliptic. And now let me go and explain, use this analogy. So the first thing we're going to talk about is an objective fact, an actual thing. So the ecliptic, in this analogy, what the ecliptic is the same way which we can think of as the landmass we call North America. Like the landmass is an objective real thing, just like the ecliptic is an objective real thing. It's a real part of space. So now we're going to go and say, compare it to a subjective fact, something that only exists as a concept or an abstract. And that's the zodiac. All right, so let me show you what the zodiac is. I'll go with this before I show you. So this is the zodiac. The zodiac is the ecliptic which has been divided into a certain way. So in this analogy, the zodiac is the same as the borders for states and countries that are applied to the landmass we call North America. North America is a thing, but then we put all of these borders all over it. And the borders aren't real, but they are real. You know, if you're going to cross over from Canada to North America, you're going to need a passport. You're going to need something, right? You know, that's a reality. But then there's a deeper reality. It's like, no, this is completely artificial. Same thing is true with the zodiac as it relates to the ecliptic. They're intimately related. They serve a purpose, but one is real and one's not a real thing. And the non-real thing can have very real consequences. So now let me go into this. So subjective fact, you know, this is something that only exists as a concept or an abstract. The tropical zodiac, you know, this is just an analogy. And the tropical zodiac's got tons and tons of truth in it. I use all the time, relative truths. And the tropical zodiac can be thought of as the 1750 borders for the colonies and countries that are applied to the landmass we call North America. Now, the Citral Zodiac, and this is all going to make sense in a moment, the Citral Zodiac are the modern borders for the states and the countries that are applied to North America. So we can begin to see that, like, there's a real thing, there's this landmass, there's the ecliptic, and then there's a zodiac, and then there are different zodiacs. And the zodiacs make sense, but they make sense relative to a certain system, whether it's like, oh, I'm looking at it from this particular time frame or this particular time frame. So now let's go into what I'm talking about. So there's our ecliptic, there's our planets going around. So I showed this, so that I'll come back to this one later. So how we are, if you were able to first identify the planets, the reason why you're going to know it's a planet versus a star is because they're moving independently. Like Jupiter or Saturn, they look like stars. You know, they appear to be the same in terms of what they are from our perspective, but you know they're different than everything else you see in the sky because they move independently, and like all the other stars move integrated. Like what I mean by that is like the Big Dipper moves as the Big Dipper across the sky. But the planets move independently. And we are able to identify where the planets are and therefore identify their movements based upon a point of reference. And those point of references are what we call either the constellations or the zodiac. So this here is Mercury, and we're able to say where Mercury is because we're like, hey, look, it's in this constellation. This is Virgo. And we can say it's at like 15 degrees Virgo, which would mean it's right in the middle of Virgo. And so we could agree, like, that is where Mercury is. And so it serves these purposes. And we could see right here, let's pay more attention to this. This is what the ecliptic would look like if you did not have labeled constellations. And then this is the ecliptic with the labeled constellations. Now, you know, these planets are in the same sort of place, but now it makes a little bit of sense. We can say where they are. Like, you know, there's no such thing as the state of Pennsylvania, but we have a state of Pennsylvania. And I could say I'm in Lancaster County. And if you're familiar enough with with Pennsylvania and its counties, you can at least picture in your mind where I am. But if we didn't have anything like that, you wouldn't be able to, it would be more difficult for me to explain where we are. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these things. I'm saying they are what they are, but there are some stuff wrong with it nonetheless. All right, so we got the zodiac. We see it divided up. Zodiac, it's divided into different, you know, the heavens. The ecliptic has been divided through the zodiac. The ecliptic is this circle, and then the zodiac is when we go and we divided it up, and then they're divided up in these 30-degree segments, 12 of them, if you will, and they're 30 times 12, that's 360 degrees, and we have that. So now let's talk about tropical and sidereal zodiac and then astronomical. And so these are just different ways of dividing up the ecliptic, just like there are different ways of dividing up the landmass of North America. So the tropical zodiac, 12 zones of equal size. I put a little bit of an asterisk because there's the 13 sign zodiac. And that says like, hey, wait, there's another sign. There's a sign in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And sure enough, there is a constellation there. And you can add that into it. And that kind of changes things. There are a couple different ways. And so that's true. That's a smaller group of people who follow that. But with that logic, you could add a whole lot more than 13 signs. I'm going to tell you that right now. Or you could write off all the signs and you could start from scratch. So there's an element of arbitrariness with this. There's also an element of truth, because arbitrariness does become truth, but it's not the ultimate truth. But anyway, when I talk about tropical, I'm just going to focus on the 12 signs because it's more universal. So 12 zones of equal size. The tropical zodiac applies meaning to each zone. It does not take in consideration the precession of the equinoxes. It is not what you see in the sky, and I'll explain that in a moment. And it also places the sun at 0 degrees Aries on the spring equinox. So don't worry if that doesn't mean anything to you. What it basically means is there's a formula. There's a formula which is used to say like, okay, our formula is we're starting with the sun at 0 degrees Aries on the equinox, and that's where we begin the zodiac. That's where the snake eats its tail, if you will, where that connection of the loop is. And this is tropical. I wrote it's dominant in Vedic astrology, but that's not true. It should be Western astrology. I'm going to change that right now. So this is like the dominant, this is dominantly used in Western astrology, but some Western astrologers use sidereal time. So what's sidereal time? Sidereal time is, again, another 12 signs of equal size. It also applies meanings to each of these signs, but it does take in consideration the precession of the equinox. It's pretty close to what you see in the sky, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And it places the sun at 7 degrees Pisces. So it's about 23 degrees different than tropical. It places the sun at that position on the spring equinox. And it's, oh, I have it backwards. This is what's dominant in Vedic astrology. And so those are just ways of dividing up of the ecliptic. And this is going to make sense. I promise. Hang in with me. This is all going to come home and you're going to make sense with it. And then the last way is astronomical. Typically, it's divided the ecliptic into 12 signs, but they're constellation. They're of unequal signs. Like if you go by astronomical, Virgo is much larger than 30 degrees right now. It's going to change. It's what we see is what we get by the constellations, and it applies no meaning to anything. So, why am I showing you all this? Because I think this is friggin' fascinating. Are you guys ready for this? So we're going back to this picture. All right. So if you remember, this right here, this is objective reality. Objective reality is it's what we're calling 9 p.m. Probably a more accurate way of saying it is the sun has been set for 2 hours or whatever you want to kind of justify or guesstimate how long the sun's been down. The moon is this far. If this is the eastern horizon, the moon is right here, and then the Jupiter's here and Saturn is here, this part of the sky. This is the highest part of the ecliptic right here. That is objectively true. This is what I'm seeing with my own eyes. This is a picture. All right. So now this is tropical. I have the tropical chart. This is tropical from September 20th, 2021 at 9 p.m. in Lancaster. And then this is the sidereal chart. Okay. According to tropical, this is a tropical chart. This is the moon. The moon is located right on the cusp, right in between Pisces and Aries. So that would say right here, this part of the ecliptic would be labeled right back here as Pisces, implying that this is where the Pisces constellation would be. And this would be Aries, and this is where the moon is. And then we find right here, Jupiter, and then here's Saturn. And so they're both in Aquarius. And so this is the tropical chart. And so then this here is the sidereal chart. And here, according to sidereal, remember, I said they're just 23 degrees different. So it's if each one of these is 30 degrees, it's almost a full shift. If you could imagine it one of those, if you're working on a lock on a safe, you're just like rotating that, not a full 360 degrees, but just 24 degrees. That's the difference between the sidereal and tropical in where they place the planets. And so we see that the moon here isn't on the cusp anymore, but it's like right in Pisces. And we see that Jupiter and Saturn, they're not in Aquarius anymore, but now they are in Capricorn. And so the point I'm trying to make with all of this is, the truth is this: the moon is like in this location relative to the horizon. This is where Jupiter is, and this is where Saturn is. And whether you want to call this Capricorn or whether you want to call that Aquarius, and there are some really, really big truths in each of those storylines. But the ultimate truth is, this is where it is. What I see with my own eyes is the functional truth. And the only thing which you can say for certain is like where it is relative to the sky and the earth and the horizon. So because of that, I'm just going to go and conclude this presentation with this. Here, I'll show you this right now. This might be an easier way of understanding the difference between sidereal and tropical. So if the AC, the ascendant, represents the eastern horizon, tropical says what part of the heavens is rising is on the eastern horizon, is the part of the heavens we call Taurus. And sidereal says, no, it's this part which we say is Aries. That's the difference. But now I'm going to introduce to you what I call objective astrology and passive astrology. And I say this based upon someone who, you can call me a professional astrologer. Like, people pay me money to give my interpretation of their natal chart using the astrological language. I recognize a huge amount of value within it, but I also recognize limitations. So this is what, to me, is a lesser limitation, but a more accurate or objective way of describing it. So objective astrology is this: understanding that the heavenly bodies hold significance into the mystery on life, and understanding that the placement of the planets relative to each other and Earth. So where are they, relative to each other? We saw Jupiter and Saturn, where they are relative to the moon and relative to the Earth. Are they visible? Are they not visible? Those things at the moment of your birth is the objective link between the human being and the environment in which you experience material life, meaning living on Earth beneath the heavens. Your natal chart, that is the most objective link you're going to have. But you use the zodiac as purely a positioning matrix and not a story matrix. So what I mean by that is, I use this understanding to be able to know where all of these planets are relative to each other so that I can label them. But I realize that it's done for positioning, because the next part is this. The next part is this. It's called passive astrology. And probably, maybe being very knowledgeable about astrology is helpful. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But passive astrology is this: understanding that the heavenly bodies hold significance into the mystery of life on Earth, but their significance is revealed intuitively by learning and studying and watching the planets' positions to Earth and each other, as opposed to going to Babylonian zodiac storylines. And so this requires a deep understanding of planets and planetary positions, but then and still utilizing the zodiac, but becoming a little bit softer, a little bit less holding on to all of these storylines, but then beginning to recognize there's something else. And so that's why, when I said in the beginning, why I thought it was, for me at least, it was so important to really pay attention to the movement of the planets to the location of my own personal natal chart. This just puts me in consciousness in harmony with that. And so by no means do I want you to think that I don't value astrology. because this is page 1 of my book. I valued it immensely. I look at it from all these different levels. In fact, I think that there's a really important story being told between someone's tropical astrology versus their sidereal astrology. But I think that it's part of something which is a bigger storyline. So it's kind of a cliffhanger, I guess, because you might be like, well, what does that mean? But I've been talking, I think, for about 2 hours now. And it is with that I would like to end this presentation. I want to thank everyone for your attention. And then I want to open it up to if there's any final questions or anything along those lines.
I want to say thank you for making this so clear and putting your whole life's experience into it. I've been really curious about things that we talked about last time we had a sit down chat around this topic. And now I get where you're coming from, and I see a roadmap to actually live by my own system that is going to bring me closer to nature. So I just really appreciate it. Thank you, man.
It's a process, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, you're like, oh, let me learn this, to then go learn this, to go like, and to forget that, but like to hold on to like what is real or objective. I think, it's all real to an extent.
I think everyone's probably really grateful. If everyone wants to unmute and say thank you to Michael for all of his gifts and wisdom and really well spelled out roadmaps for us, that would be awesome.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
Thank
you,
you,
Michael.
So much.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
That was awesome.
Well, thank you for being an attentive audience. It's so freaking hard to do this when you can't like read your audience because they're not in front of you. And so, I've I don't even know I'm talking to people, but so I appreciate hearing the feedback. Thank you very much for that. And I'll say this one other thing, what I've learned in my experience, even like presenting information in person, which is kind of funny. There's very, very little difference in someone's expression when they are 100% engaged and 100% bored out of their mind. Like it looks the same. And so it's like, there's always this like, it's the feedback loop, right? I want to know that I'm connected to my audience, or at least the information which I'm sharing, that they're hearing it. So thank you for that. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for being here. This is a long day. So I would understand. I understand if like, there's probably a lot you need to unpack. If people are interested in like follow-up sessions, I think I'm going to start working with people again, but what I want to work with people is helping them understand this in their chart. So if anyone's interested in that, they could just find me at Susquehanna Alchemy and maybe we could set something up. And if you just want to shoot me a message, you could do that as well. You could always just send me an email that way. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say for right now.
I sent everybody a follow-up email before we were even done on accident. I had it drafted because I do have a lot of Virgo in my chart, but everyone has that already. And Michael, you have a section in there of summary of what you presented and links to your site so people can easily click and follow through on that too. And I, Chance had the idea and I was thinking it before he said it in the chat, and Michael, maybe you and I will talk further about whether or not you want to do some work with Brighter You, which we were talking about earlier today, as a newly launched university for brightening you. So people who love One Day of Brightness, like we've done today, now for the 4th time in the cycle, and don't want to wait 2 or 3 months until the next One Day of Brightness, can get involved in Brighter You. And so I've invited everybody to apply. I've sent that link out in the email as well. Everybody can go and check out the site at CoreySharman.com/BrighterYou, which is also linked to in the email, and see if they're into it. And maybe, or maybe not, Michael might be involved in that in the future too. So and maybe at the next One Day of Brightness too. We never know how that's going to go or how it's going to turn out. I didn't know when I planned the day for this One Day of Brightness who would be presenting, who would be here, and how it would go. And that's just how it goes. But I have already set the date for the next One Day of Brightness. And so if anybody wants to, right now, you can use the coupon code Bright Winter for $15 off, which is 25% off the ticket price. And that's for the next week. So if you already know you're coming to the next one day and you want to get a really nice discount, go check that out and you can grab that starting now if you would like, and for the next week. And if you want to wait and buy later, that's cool too. Whatever works for you, but that offering is there for you as well. And it was not in the follow-up email. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew about that. And I, of course, I'm going to be sending the link to this video of all day, because I know people have to step in and out, and you might want to go back, and everything Michael just laid out, you might want to watch that a few times to really let it like sink in, because it's dense. And
I was
Michael's-
taking notes. I have pages of notes now.
I know, I noticed a lot of people were. So you could revisit that for your own note taking or fulfillment. And I think that's all my announcements. I do have a giveaway, and this is for anybody who would like to receive an orgone plaque piece. These are normally about $60 on my site. And this one it's kind of the ugly duckling of a bunch. But that's because it is packed full of things that don't necessarily look good together, but have an energetic package that is addressing every single level of your being, soul, heart, mind, and body. And it's kind of hard to see. It's very reflective. And so, if you're just into aesthetics, this might not be your jam, but if you like the idea of this addressing every level of your energetic soul, heart, mind, and body level, and you would like to receive this, I can ship within the United States, but if you would like to, those of you in Mexico and Canada, try to win this anyways, and you just want to help out with shipping costs, I'm happy to do that as well. So that's just up to you. So you decide. And so I'm going to think of a number between 1 and 40 again. And if you want to make sure you're sending it to everyone, put your number into the chat now, you could do that.
Lindsay, I hope this is not rude, but I have to run. I went way over my budget.
Oh, yeah.
And so I got to go. People are waiting for me.
You're
You're the man.
fantastic. We
right.
love you, Michael.
All right, my friends, until the next time, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.